Hey guys, welcome to 12 Tone. Today we're going to talk about dominant scales. These are a special type of chord scale which, as you might guess, can be used over a dominant 7th chord. They all have the same chord tones, but they can vary greatly in terms of tensions and non-harmonic tones, so if you need to review those, now's the time. Moving on, the most obvious of these is probably Mixolydian, the 5th mode of the major scale. It's exactly like major, but with a flat 7, giving it the chord tones of a dominant 7th plus a major 2nd, a perfect 4th, and a major 6th. This is a simple solution and it works pretty well most of the time, but there are plenty of other options out there. We haven't talked about this yet, but you can actually make modes from any parent scale you want, not just major. For instance, let's try harmonic minor. This, as we've covered, is natural minor but with a raised 7th. If we take its 5th mode, we get this. This also contains a dominant 7th chord, but where before we had major 2nds and 6ths, here we have flat ones. This gives us the same tensions as we'd get in the Phrygian mode, which is why this scale is often called Phrygian dominant. You can also do this with melodic minor to get this. This is somewhere between the previous two with a major 2nd and a minor 6th. I like to call this Aeolian dominant, but I usually just hear it called Mixolydian flat 6. It's not used that often because melodic minor just isn't that popular, but if you like the way it sounds, give it a shot. Continuing with the naming convention, we come to Lydian dominant, which as you might guess borrows its tensions from the Lydian mode with an augmented 4th. This is nice because the perfect 11th is the only tension that doesn't work over a dominant chord, so raising it to a sharp 11 lets us use all the scale's tensions freely. Another scale that's all about tensions is altered, which we've discussed before. Altered can be thought of as the flat everything scale. And with a flat 3, you wouldn't expect it to work over a dominant chord, but because the flat 4 is enharmonic to a major 3rd, it kinda does, but there is one problem. There's no perfect 5th. Our chord is incomplete, but it turns out that the 5th in a dominant chord is actually pretty superfluous. It doesn't really do anything. The tritone is doing most of the heavy lifting, and the rest of the slack is picked up by the root movement. The 5th just sort of dissolves away. So while the altered scale doesn't have a full dominant 7th chord, it has what we call a shell voicing, which is the root plus the 3rd and the 7th, and that's good enough. And by sacrificing the 5th, you get access to a really cool scale. In addition to the shell voicing, altered contains every single chromatically altered tension. You've got the flat 9, the sharp 9, the sharp 11, and the flat 13. This gives you a lot of options for sounding dark. You do need to let your players know though to avoid any perfect 5ths sneaking in, so if you plan to use altered over a chord, just write alt next to the chord symbol so everyone's on the same page. The next scale I want to talk about is slightly different from the others. It's an octatonic or 8-note scale and it's semi-symmetrical. It works like this. We start on the root, go up a half step, then a whole step, then repeat. This is known as the dominant diminished or half-whole scale and consists of the notes of 2 diminished 7th chords a half step apart. It's a really deep scale and we don't have time to cover all the interesting facets of it here, but maybe we'll make a whole video about it at some point because there's a lot to say. Finally, the blues scale is also often used over dominant chords despite not containing a major 3rd at all. It's weird, but it sounds good, so why not? So which of these should you use? Well, that depends. If the chord symbol calls for specific tensions, you should obviously pick a scale that has those tensions. If it doesn't, it mostly depends on the target chord. If you're resolving to major, you probably want a brighter, happier scale like Mixolydian or Lydian dominant, whereas if it's minor, you might lean towards Phrygian dominant, altered, or dominant diminished. Each one has its own unique sound, and I recommend getting familiar with all of them so you know which ones you like best and which ones will do what you need. And that's dominant scales. Try the exercises, join our mailing list for scans of all our episodes, feel free to suggest future topics in the comments, and keep on rockin'.